The courtroom smelled of pine cleaner and cold justice. Ava Johnson moved quietly down the aisle, mop in hand, head slightly bowed. Not in submission, but in focus. The courtroom was in recess, and she, as always, used the short break to wipe the polished wood floors that echoed with verdicts never meant for people like her. She worked methodically, like she did every day, unnoticed, unthanked, until today. Judge Randolph Pierce, robed in authority and seated above the room like a monarch, glanced down as Ava's mop slid past the step below his bench. He sneered, "Careful where you clean, miss. This isn't your kitchen floor." A few snickers rolled from the gallery. One of the court officers chuckled, not hiding it. Even the clerk cracked a grin. Ava paused, wrung out the mop silently, and moved slightly away without looking up. But that wasn't enough for Judge Pierce. "You people should learn boundaries," he added, sipping water from the glass beside his gavel. "Some lines aren't meant to be crossed, certainly not by custodial staff." The snickering turned to full laughter now. No one said anything. No one needed to. The message had already been delivered. Ava didn't speak. She didn't drop the mop or storm out. She didn't protest or look around for allies. Instead, she stood up slowly, rolled the mop head back into the bucket, and pushed it toward the courtroom door. And just before she crossed the threshold, she paused, turned her head slightly, not enough to make a scene, just enough for one quiet, piercing glance. Straight at the judge, not angry, not sad, just aware. Judge Pierce blinked first. The door clicked shut behind her. "Before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from? And if Ava's silence hit you harder than words ever could, let it echo in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, because in the next part, the floor cleaner might just clean up the entire courtroom." The trial resumed. Spectators returned to their benches, unaware that something far greater than the case at hand had already begun shifting under their feet. Judge Pierce leaned forward, expression blank, tapping his gavel twice as murmurs settled into silence. The defendant, a young black man in his 20s, sat straight but nervous. His eyes kept darting between his public defender and the judge. The prosecutor, dressed in gray silk and smugness, adjusted his cufflinks and flashed a confident smirk. But at the far end of the courtroom, almost forgotten, Ava Johnson slipped into the back row. No mop in her hand now. Just silence. She sat on the last bench, coat zipped to her chin, head lowered but eyes wide open. She wasn't just watching. She was studying, listening, memorizing. This courtroom, after all, had become her evening classroom. For the past 9 months, after finishing her shift, Ava had taken the same seat in different trials. She never missed one. To the staff, she was just the janitor who lingered, a harmless shadow in the rear pews. No one questioned her. No one thought to ask why she always took notes, tiny scribbles on a folded napkin or back of a grocery receipt. No one noticed the pattern in the cases she chose to observe. Race-based arrests, thin evidence, confident prosecutors, silenced defendants. The judge leaned back in his chair, sighing with performative boredom. "Let's move this along, counsel. We're not here to hold philosophy lectures." The defense attorney flushed, clearly rattled. A crucial witness had just been dismissed by the judge without proper review, and the prosecutor didn't even bother hiding his grin. Ava didn't flinch. She had seen it all before. The way the law bent, not with a gavel, but with a glance. But this time, something felt different. Not in the case. In her. She pulled out a worn envelope from her coat pocket and ran a thumb over the name typed on it. A J. Johnson, Esquire, United States Department of Justice. She stared at it for a moment, then folded it back and tucked it into her sleeve. Judge Pierce cracked another joke at the defense's expense. More laughter followed. The courtroom felt like a club, one where power handed out punchlines, and justice had a 2-drink minimum. But in the back row, Ava's gaze remained fixed, not on the judge, but on the system wrapped around him like armor. And in that moment, she made a silent decision. It started with a whisper of arrogance, so soft it could have gone unnoticed. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense has the right to present that footage," the young attorney pleaded, his voice shaking under pressure. Judge Pierce didn't even look up. "Denied. But it proves denied," the judge said again, this time with finality, eyes already on his notes. Ava's brow twitched slightly in the back row. The courtroom didn't tremble, but something inside her did. The attorney sat back, defeated. The defendant, barely more than a boy, lowered his head into his hands. His mother, seated just a few benches ahead of Ava, silently wept into her scarf. The footage Ava had overheard earlier was a street camera recording. It could have shown the boy doing exactly what he said, waiting for his sister outside a convenience store. Instead, he'd been accused of loitering, resisting arrest, and attempting to flee by the same officers Ava had seen testifying all week with smirks and inconsistencies. But the jury would never see the tape. Judge Pierce had made sure of that. Ava's hands clenched beneath her coat. She remembered when the law had once meant something sacred to her, when courtrooms like this had been cathedrals of truth, not theaters of control. That illusion had cracked long ago. But now, it wasn't just cracked. It was hemorrhaging. She watched as the prosecutor stood confidently and began summarizing the case. He painted the defendant as reckless, aggressive, suspicious. There was no mention of context, no interest in truth, just performance dressed in a suit. And Judge Pierce, he let it slide. Every distorted word, every prejudiced phrase. Ava leaned forward slightly. In that moment, she wasn't watching anymore. She was preparing. She knew where the backup copy of that surveillance footage was. She had seen the officer mishandle the chain of custody form. She had noted every missing page in the documentation. The courtroom thought she was invisible. They had no idea the woman who changed their trash had once taken down entire criminal empires with evidence 10 times less complete. And now they had left the door wide open. She would not let this one slide. The courthouse clock struck 5. The halls emptied. The laughter faded. Ava walked alone, bucket trailing behind her. Her shoes made no sound on the tiled floor, years of practice. The courthouse lights dimmed as she passed, casting her in silhouettes and secrets. When she stepped through her apartment door, it creaked like it always did. No alarm system, no framed degrees on the wall, just silence and structure. She set the mop in its place, took off her coat, and locked the door behind her. Then she knelt. Underneath the faded couch, behind an old box of winter shoes, she pulled out the thing she hadn't touched in years, a black briefcase with tarnished brass latches. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, and opened it slowly. Inside lay a life the world had forgotten. Federal Prosecutor badge, scratched but intact. Bar certification from Georgetown Law. Service commendations from the Department of Justice. And one document marked Confidential Clearance Level 4. She ran her fingers over it all, not to remember, but to remind herself that it had been real, that she had been real. Ava Johnson had once walked through marble federal courts in a tailored suit, shutting down criminal networks that spanned states. She had led sting operations, flipped high-level witnesses, brought human traffickers to justice. Her nickname in D.C. had been the Blade, because her arguments didn't shout. They cut. But none of that had mattered when her brother was framed for a crime he didn't commit. A local court, much like Judge Pierce's, buried the truth beneath procedure. The prosecutor never presented his alibi. The judge ruled the case closed in less than 2 hours. Ava had fought, filed motions, pleas, appeals, all denied. 3 months later, her brother died in prison, beaten in solitary confinement. That day, Ava vanished from the public record. No farewell, no resignation speech. She'd taken a job no one would question, night janitor in small-town courthouses. Quiet, unseen, the perfect seat for observation. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She stared at her badge a moment longer, then placed it gently beside her on the floor. She opened a notebook, pages already filled with dates, trial names, inconsistencies, all of them tied to Judge Pierce's courtroom. Her eyes landed on today's entry. She circled one word in black ink, footage. And then, underneath, she wrote 2 more. Time's up. 2 days later, the courthouse felt no different. Same linoleum shine. Same stale coffee scent lingering in the halls. Same eyes that slid past Ava without seeing her. But something was different. In her hand, instead of a mop, Ava held a manila envelope, neatly sealed, carefully labeled. She walked straight to the records office. The clerk behind the window barely looked up. Maintenance requests go through facilities. This isn't maintenance, Ava said softly, placing the envelope on the counter. It's a legal filing, amicus brief. Attached are 3 exhibits and a transcript request. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Wait, are you filing this? She nodded. Name is A. J. Johnson. Bar numbers on the back page. A moment of awkward silence. The clerk flipped through the documents, pages laced with language most junior attorneys wouldn't dare write. Case law, judicial conduct violations, evidence chain anomalies, every paragraph more precise than the last. I'll get this stamped, the clerk mumbled, disappearing down the hall. Ava turned, walked away, and resumed her usual route, mop in one hand, floor signs in the other, as if nothing had happened, but something had. By the time Judge Pierce entered the courtroom that afternoon, the file was already sitting in his inbox, unread, unnoticed, until the hearing resumed. Your Honor, the defense attorney stammered, rising from his seat, before we proceed, we received a surprise amicus brief this morning from someone named A. J. Johnson. It challenges the admissibility of 2 pieces of evidence, with citations I've never even seen before. Pierce narrowed his eyes. This trial doesn't need outside opinions from law students playing superhero. I don't think they're a student, the attorney said, voice steadier now. You may want to look at their credentials. Murmurs spread through the gallery. The prosecutor grabbed the file, flipping through it quickly, his face going pale as he scanned the author's legal history. A former federal prosecutor. Filing a brief here? Who is this Johnson? Pierce snapped. No one answered. But in the back row, Ava sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching, listening. For now, it started with a hallway whisper. A J. Johnson. You seen this brief? By mid-morning, the whispers turned into hushed conversations in break rooms and behind courtroom doors. The language in the brief had cut through the prosecutor's case like a scalpel, precise, unflinching. Whoever this Johnson was, they weren't local, they weren't green, and they weren't afraid. In the clerk's office, paralegals passed the printed copy between them like forbidden literature. One pointed out a signature on the final page, small, sharp, and followed by a bar number no one could trace to the county. Judge Pierce stood by his office window, staring at the town square, jaw clenched. He hadn't spoken of the brief, not in chambers, not in court. but his pacing had changed. His gavel now struck the bench with more force than necessary. In the hallway, one of his junior clerks turned to another and muttered, "You think it's a former Fed." That filing felt surgical. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor reread the pages again and again, highlighting phrases with shaking fingers. Chain of evidence was compromised prior to courtroom entry. Photographic metadata does not align with sworn officer statements. This is not legal oversight. It is judicial negligence. Who had the nerve to write that in Judge Pierce's court? At recess, defense counsel approached the judge's clerk, trying not to look nervous. "Can we verify who filed this brief?" The clerk frowned. "It was submitted under A.J. Johnson, but we don't have a local bar registration with that name." "No state record?" "None. But the bar number tracks to DCA pause, and it's active." Back in the courtroom, Ava returned to her seat in the last row. Same quiet presence, same lowered gaze. But her coat was slightly open now. A glimpse of a tailored black blouse peeked out. Subtle, intentional. One of the bailiffs glanced at her for a beat too long, then looked away. It had begun. They were wondering, guessing. The woman no one noticed was starting to draw shadows behind her name. And still, Ava said nothing. She simply watched as Judge Pierce called the next witness, with a tremor barely noticeable in his voice, but she heard it. She always heard it. It was raining that morning, not the soft kind. Heavy, cold, relentless. But inside the courthouse, it was even colder because everyone felt something was coming. They just didn't know what. The usual court staff whispered a little quieter. The prosecutor barely spoke at all. Even the bailiffs, normally indifferent, seemed watchful. And then the door opened. Not the back door she always used. The front one. The one reserved for lawyers, witnesses, and power. Ava stepped through it. No mop, no coat, no bucket. Just a tailored black suit, polished shoes, and a stare that didn't seek approval. It demanded acknowledgement. A sharp breath caught in someone's throat. A whisper. "Is that—" Judge Pierce looked up mid-sentence and faltered. His voice clipped. "Who?" She didn't stop to answer. She walked calmly down the center aisle, the same one she'd mopped for nearly a year, each step echoing with something different now. Not silence, authority. She stopped at the court clerk's table, pulled out a badge from her inside pocket. "Federal credentials," she said simply. "Bar ID is on file. I'll be speaking today." The clerk stood there frozen, unsure whether to nod or no. Pierce leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed. "Miss Johnson?" Ava turned to him. "No, Judge Pierce. It's Prosecutor Ava Johnson, former Department of Justice. And you dismissed my filing without reading it, so I'm here to read it for you." A beat of silence. No one breathed. She stepped past the clerk's table, placed a second copy of the brief on the bench in front of him. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't rise. "I believe the court has a duty to hear the full truth, and if you won't deliver it, then I will." Gasps. A few jurors leaned forward, eyes wide. Even the prosecutor had gone pale. "You've been watching my court?" Judge Pierce said slowly. "For a year," she answered. "Studying your rulings, documenting your rejections, memorizing every time you silenced a voice that didn't look like yours." He opened his mouth, but she cut him off, not with volume, but with finality. "And now I'm speaking." Ava stood at the center of the courtroom, not behind a mop bucket, not tucked into the shadows. She stood with full command. She faced the jury first, her voice calm but purposeful. "You've been told this case is simple. That evidence pointed one way. But what you haven't been told, what you were never supposed to see, are the blind spots deliberately created around the truth. The courtroom was silent. Even the ceiling fans seemed to hush. Judge Pierce shifted in his chair. "Miss Johnson, I don't believe this is—" She didn't look at him. She raised a hand, gracefully. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm not here to perform. I'm here to clarify what you failed to disclose." She turned toward the gallery and held up a printed image from the surveillance video. This footage, dismissed without discussion, shows the defendant standing still, not running, not resisting, standing. The jury leaned in. The prosecution claimed the timestamp was corrupted, but the original metadata proves it was recorded at the exact time of the alleged incident. You didn't miss that. She glanced at the prosecutor. You ignored it. A sharp inhale echoed from the second row. A woman in the audience covered her mouth. Ava took another step forward, slower now, as if pulling the entire room into her rhythm. You were told Officer Daniels acted in fear. She continued, voice steady, but his own body cam, muted by technical error, had audio backups from the dispatch center. And what did they reveal? She paused. Calm breathing, no shouting, no struggle. She let the words float there, then turned. To Officer Daniels I say this: fear is not an excuse for lies. The officer, seated in uniform near the prosecutor's table, shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Ava turned to the judge. And to the bench, I ask, when did protecting the illusion of order become more important than protecting the actual truth? Judge Pierce opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes darted toward the file Ava had placed earlier. She didn't stop. You've denied voices in this courtroom long before I walked through the front door, but here's the truth you can't deny. She picked up a page from her brief. The law doesn't care about robes or routines. It cares about facts. And in that moment, the room seemed to realign itself around her. Not the judge, not the prosecutor. Her. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. But to those sitting inside that courtroom, it felt like time had folded in on itself. No one spoke. No one shifted. Even Judge Pierce sat still, drumming his fingers in silence. Ava remained seated in the front row, her back straight, eyes forward, not watching the people, but the moment. She knew this feeling, not from courtrooms but from missions, the stillness before detonation. Then the doors opened. 12 jurors filed in, their expressions unreadable. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a navy sweater, clutched a folded paper in trembling hands. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The paper was passed to the bailiff, then to the judge. Pierce glanced down, just for a second. Something flickered across his face. His jaw tightened. His fingers hesitated. He looked up. In the case of the state versus Darnell Watkins, he began, voice rough, we, the jury, find the defendant. A beat of silence. Not guilty, on all counts. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a sudden wave. The defendant's mother burst into tears, hands over her mouth. His lawyer exhaled, shoulders collapsing in relief. But all eyes turned, not to the freed young man, to Avenue. She didn't react. No smile, no nod. Just the same steady gaze that had watched the whole house of cards collapse, knowing it would. Judge Pierce struck his gavel for order, but his voice lacked its old authority. He sounded hollow. The foreperson cleared her throat again. Additionally, we recommend a formal review of courtroom procedure and judicial conduct in this case, specifically the suppression of key evidence. The second blow. The prosecutor paled. Judge Pierce stiffened, lips parting in disbelief. And Ava? She finally stood. Not abruptly, not theatrically, just firmly. Outside the courthouse, the storm had passed, but the crowd had swelled. Reporters packed the steps, their cameras already rolling. Activists stood holding signs. Former defendants Ava had quietly helped before now watched her with awe. As she exited, microphones swarmed. "Miss Johnson, who are you, really? Were you always undercover? What message do you have for this courtroom, this judge?" Ava raised her hand. The crowd stilled. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, voice clear. "I'm here for correction." They leaned in. This courtroom has silenced too many. Today, it heard one voice, and that was enough to expose a pattern of injustice. She paused. But one voice isn't enough to fix it. That takes many. The courtroom had emptied. But Ava didn't stay for the applause. She slipped out quietly, as if her work wasn't to be celebrated, but continued. Hours later, she stood under an old oak tree in the cemetery on the south side of town. Wind stirred the dry grass, whispering through the rows of weathered headstones. In front of her, the grave was simple. Malik A. Johnson. He smiled anyway. Ava knelt, setting down a small bouquet of sunflowers, his favorite. No cameras, no reporters, just her. "I kept the promise, Malik," she said softly. "Not just to clear your name, but to make sure they never do it again to someone else." She rested a hand against the headstone, eyes closed. "I stayed quiet because I thought silence was strength, but silence is only powerful when it breaks at the right moment." She opened her eyes. No tears, just quiet fire. "And I broke it today." From behind her, footsteps approached. It was Nathaniel, the young attorney from the trial. He held a folded newspaper, today's front page already wrinkled from use. "Federal prosecutor exposes judge in explosive courtroom reveal." He offered a soft smile. "You sure you don't want to give an interview?" Ava shook her head. "The story isn't me. Then what is it?" She looked up at the sky, gray but clearing. "It's a warning," she said, "that justice has eyes now, and this time we're not blinking." Nathaniel nodded slowly, humbled. "So, what's next?" Ava stood, brushing the leaves off her coat. Her voice steady and sure. "Now, we teach others how to fight." Because justice doesn't happen when one voice rises. It happens when enough of us stop sitting down. They began walking back toward the road. Ava glanced at the town behind them, still quiet, still watching. But different now, because something had shifted. Not in law, in people, and that's where her real mission begins. Not in the courtroom, but in the lives that follow. If Ava Johnson's journey stirred something in you, drop a "justice" in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, and tell us. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Hit that button to follow Ava's next story, because these fights are just getting started. Like, share, and join the mission.